Hey everyone, welcome back to Into the Stars. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly how a lunar eclipse occurs and why a super blood moon is quite rare. A lot of things have to happen for a lunar eclipse to occur, so I'm going to use a simulation to help explain it. In this simulation, I have the sun, the earth, and the moon. You can see the sun is casting light onto the earth, that's why that side of the earth is lit up, and the other side of the earth has a big long shadow being cast into space. And if you look at the moon, half of it's lit because that part is being lit up by the sun, and the other half is dark. You can also see the ring going around the earth, that is the orbit of the moon. And in this video, I'm going to ignore a couple things. One, that the Earth rotates. We're just going to ignore that for now. I'll help explain why that's important later. The other thing I'm going to ignore is that the Earth actually goes around the sun. We're just going to ignore that for now. So we have a top-down view of this system, and I'm going to start the moon orbiting, and as you can see, the moon is getting closer and closer to the shadow. I'm going to bring up a little picture here that shows it. And so as the moon gets closer and closer to the shadow, you're going to see the moon start to appear in the image. And as the moon moves across the image, you're going to see it black out. And the reason it's blacking out is because it's passing through the shadow. So there's the moon, nice full moon. It's being entering the shadow, it blacks out completely. Once it passes through the shadow, it starts to light up, and there we go. Notice it's a full moon. An eclipse can only occur when the moon is on the opposite side of the Sun-Earth system, and that's when it's going to occur. So it's only going to happen when it's a full moon. So you may ask, well, if a full moon occurs once roughly a month, why don't we get a lunar eclipse every month? I mean, it's a great question to ask, and if you ask that question, you're really thinking, what I'm going to do in this simulation is I can actually rotate, and I'm going to bring to the side and take a look at what's actually happening here. The reason we don't get a lunar eclipse once a month is because the slope of the orbit of the moon around the sun is actually inclined. It's only inclined by 5 degrees, but I'm going to exaggerate it in this program just so you can see it. So let me just exaggerate that. I'm going to move it all the way up. I got it up to 20 degrees. It's only 5 degrees in reality, but if I move back to the side, you can see there's the orbit of the moon going around the earth, and it's quite slanted there. To make it a little bit simpler, I'm going to create a galactic plane that stretches out from the Earth's equator and cuts right through the sun's equator as well. So let's just kind of throw that in there. You can see that there's some galactic plane there, we'll call that. And then we have the orbit of the moon. And you can see the moon is actually below the plane right now. In order for an eclipse to occur, the moon must be on this side of the Earth, and it must be passing right through this plane. So both things must happen. Now in this situation and in this simulation, that's already set up. Let me go back. And I'm going to hit play. And I'm going to cut right into the shadow so you can see this is going to happen just as the moon passes on the other side of the Earth. It'll be a full moon, and notice it's passing right through the ecliptic right now. And so there would be a perfect lunar eclipse. So you may look at this and go, well, why doesn't that still happen once a month? And that's because the Earth rotates around the sun. And as the Earth rotates around the sun, the moon would be full on this side. For example, let's say the Earth was way over here, then the moon would be full, and it would actually be full right at this moment when it's down below. And notice it's below the ecliptic, so we would not get that shadow being cast onto the surface of the moon. So if someone asks you, why don't we get a lunar eclipse every month? It's because the moon's orbit is inclined by 5 degrees. So what is a super rare blood moon? Well, what we're going to actually happen is a full eclipse. Even a lunar eclipse happens probably twice a year to around 5 times a year. And the reason we get an eclipse is because sometimes the moon passes just slightly over this. So it may not cut right through perfectly, but it's pretty darn close. And when that happens, the shadow does get cast onto the moon, but not perfectly. So we get what's called a partial eclipse. A total eclipse happens when they line up just perfectly, and that can be quite rare. That can happen every maybe a year or so. A super rare blood moon, though, occurs when two things. One, we get a lunar eclipse. So we just talked about how we get a lunar eclipse. And the second thing has to happen, which is the moon does not actually follow a perfect circular orbit around the Earth. It actually is an elliptical orbit, which means at one point in its orbit, the moon is actually closer to the Earth. And at the other side of the orbit, the moon is actually further. Now, it's not a tremendous difference, but you can actually notice it. And when it's closer, the moon looks bigger, especially when it's full and it's at its closest approach. A super rare blood moon means that we have a total lunar eclipse, which is rare in itself, and it happens to be happening at the same time that the moon is closest to the Earth. And so we're going to get this really cool lunar eclipse, and it's going to look huge. Why does it look red? That has to do with the scattering of the light. Basically, we have light that's being scattered in our atmosphere, which is blue. That's why we see blue light all the time. And then the longer wavelengths, like red, they'll actually get kind of cast around the Earth and then get projected onto the moon. It's the same reason the sky can have all those colorful lights as the sun is starting to set. So the moon is going to look red as the eclipse happens, and it's also going to be really big. It's going to be a full moon as it starts to happen, and then it's going to black out, and it's going to be really, really cool to see. I'm going to be doing it live. I'm going to be outside looking at the moon. Unfortunately, because of where I live, I'm not going to be able to see it when the eclipse happens. I'll be able to see the full moon, but unfortunately, when the eclipse does happen, the full moon will just be setting where I live, so I won't be able to see the full eclipse. But I will be able to see the moon when it's super full, and I'm going to be doing that live. So if you want to come watch me live, hit the subscribe button, and you can watch, and I'll talk more about what we're seeing at that time.